Hello and welcome to Talk Leadership with Cedrick. Everybody needs a little TLC. Talk Leadership with Cedrick is where we focus on leadership and personal growth with business leaders, educators, and local thought leaders. Our goal is to introduce our audience to leaders who are making an impact with innovative ideas. Our guiding leadership principle is the law of contribution, which says growing yourself enables you to grow others. So you can't give what you don't have. So first you must grow yourself in order to grow others. So we believe that outstanding leaders like yourself will help us to help others. So tonight we have another dynamic leader with us tonight, folks. And I'm so excited to introduce our guest tonight. We both are retired from Abbott, and I worked on one of his teams, and I'm gonna introduce you to him. And let me tell you what, folks, sit back a little bit and relax. Let me go through his impressive bio for you real quick. But our guest tonight is Mr. Joe Nemmers. Now, Joe is an executive with over 4 decades of experience in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. He presently serves on the board of directors of DNA Diagnostics Center in Cincinnati, a leading DNA testing company. He is also an advisor to Perot Medical, a medical device startup company on the East Coast. From 2010 to 2017, Joe worked with global private equity firm called Warburg Pincus as an executive in residence and a senior advisor for several successful investments. Now, in 2007, Joe retired from Abbott Laboratories after 27 years of service. Now, that's a long time, folks. Think about that. 27 years with one organization. He worked in Abbott's hospital, pharmaceutical, international, and diagnostic divisions. He was also an executive director of the nonprofit Claire Abbott Foundation. Now, the Claire Abbott Foundation, folks, does some wonderful work for the community. But Joe led the integration of one of Abbott's largest at the time mergers, if you will, $7 billion acquisition of Knoll Pharmaceuticals, now known as Humira. And he was elected as the corporate officer in 2001. In 2003, he was named the president of Abbott Diagnostics and a senior vice president for diagnostics operations, where he managed the turnaround of the laboratory diagnostic franchise. In 2006, he was appointed executive vice president. See, folks, when we bring people here, we're bringing some heavy hitters here. Tonight, we have one of those. Executive vice president, responsible for 5 Abbott medical product businesses, with a value of $3.5 billion in sales and over 13,000 employees. And he was a member of Abbott's executive leadership team. Now, Joe is a graduate of Arizona State University, where he has a bachelor's degree in history, and he also gained a commission in the United States Army through the ROTC program. He is presently pursuing his master's degree in history from Arizona State University. Now, I want to stop right there, folks. I want to say this. See, folks, once you reach a certain level, it doesn't mean you stop growing. It means that you just continue growing and you expand yourself. So he's pursuing his master's degree from Arizona State University. He is an author of 4 books about his family and is presently writing a book on leadership. Now, we have to get that book, folks. When it comes out, we're going to make sure we mention that, right? Joe served as an Army officer in the Army from 1979 to 1993. As an Army officer, he was among his many commands and staff positions. He was an armored cavalry instructor. He has been a very active community volunteer for over 4 decades and has held many board leadership positions in human services and social services and in parochial education. He is the founder of Christ the King Jesuit College Prep. Let me say that again, folks. Let me make sure you understand this. He is the founder of Christ the King Jesuit College Prep, on Chicago's west side. It's a tough side of town, folks. St. John's, St. Paul, let's see, hold on a second. St. John Paul II High School in Arizona. And he is the immediate past chair of Carmel Catholic High School in Illinois. And presently, he is mentoring Franciscan friars of Holy Spirit. Now, folks, let me say this. You see, when you are an executive leader, when you are trying to also add value to other people, you do great things. And I want you tonight to listen in to this man as he talk about, he's not going to brag about it, but he's going to talk about some of the things that he's doing. And it's important for you to understand this. That's why I'm stopping here. It's important for you to understand it's not about your life. It's about what you give back to communities that you serve. He is the past trustee of the college at St. Benedict in Minnesota. And finally, but it's the greatest part of his life. He is married to his wife, Kathy Rankin Nemmers, who is also a proud Abbott retiree, and they live in Scottsdale, Arizona. Together, they have 9 children and 5 grandchildren. So, folks, help me welcome Mr. Joseph Nemmers Jr. to the show.
Hi, Cedrick. Thanks for that build-up. I don't want to disappoint your audience.
No, it's important that people understand what things Americans are doing in the world today. It's important for people to understand the things that people do to give back to their community, right? They hear about titles, but then they don't get to see the other side of it. So that's why it's important for me to read the bio so people can see other things that people are doing. Well, again, thank you for taking the time to come on the show tonight. We're just going to dive right in. So, I've kind of read I did read your bio, but tell the listeners about your journey to leadership and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, first off, Cedrick, I want you to know I have your Cedrick LaFleur coin with me, which I keep on my desk at all times, and it's here with me tonight.
That's awesome.
It's a long journey, Cedrick. It goes back about 50 years. As far as journey to leadership, for me, it started in high school. It was sort of developed in the Army, and then it kind of got honed in the work I've done at Abbott since then. In high school, my freshman year, I was kind of a quiet kid, and I was looking for something different to kind of raise my profile and get some experience. And I joined student government. I did that for 3 years. We had a very active student government, and ended up as the president of my senior class. I won't tell you the stories now, but I did learn how lonely leadership can be even when you're 18 years old. Like I said, we won't talk about those. The military was critical, as we'll talk in a minute, to developing sort of the foundation of my leadership skills. And of course, Abbott gave me lots of opportunity over 27 years. So it sort of progressed from student all the way through my corporate life, and now I'm back as a student again.
That is amazing. So, what made you decide hey, I need to go back and get this master's degree?
Well, it's something I always wanted to do. I thought at one time about being a teacher, and that didn't get very far because I went in the Army and then I went to work at Abbott. But always something I wanted to do. History's been a passion of mine for a long time. And ASU offers a very special program. The concentration is only about World War II, which is always the one thing I wanted to study. So it kind of all fell into place. And next month, I'm back in class again.
Wow, that is amazing. And for the young people in the audience, this is important for you to really see and understand that growth never stops. No matter where you are in your journey, growth never stops. So you had a long executive level corporate career. Help our audience understand the role that the military played. I know you were in the military, at a younger age, but what role did the military play in shaping your leadership style?
Well, it played most of the role. In the Army in particular, this from the Air Force, leadership is presented at all times. We're asked to study it, we're asked to read about it, we're asked to observe great leaders, and we're obviously asked to practice it, much more than you see in the corporate world. So for me, it was the foundation of everything I ever learned about leadership. One of the things that's always been difficult, and you may have experienced this too, when you present military experience to a civilian audience, a lot of our country haven't served, and so they don't necessarily understand the translation of how that works in the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And for me, you mentioned I was an armor officer, I was a tanker, and I used to train young men to be cavalry scouts. I don't tell people that because it's about as far away from what they do in the real world as you could possibly imagine. But all the things that are necessary to get them to do that are the very basics of leadership skills. And I always like to tell the story. I was taught as a very young officer, the very fundamentals of servant leadership, which was, we didn't eat until our soldiers ate. And if there was no food left, we went hungry. We didn't sleep until our soldiers slept. We didn't take cover from the weather until they did. So they always came first. And it's a wonderful way to sort of develop the basis of thinking about leadership, particularly if you end up responsibility for big organizations. So the Army certainly played a big part, and a lot of it was professional development. It's always what I found in a long time at Abbott and since then was you have to almost go looking or volunteer for leadership courses in the corporate world. In the military, it's presented to you on a daily basis, and so it was so easy for me to do.
Yeah, and it's presented to you on a daily basis. And when I was in the Air Force, it wasn't well. Hey, do you want to go to this course? You've already been enrolled in this course, and
that's right.
But that definitely helps grows your leadership ability and path. So, the audience is always interested in the path of an executive leader. And you've had a lot of different jobs, a lot of different roles. So walk us through some of the different jobs you took along your career path. And the reason I'm asking this, Joe, is because we have some people that are in sales that are trying to understand how to navigate different career paths. So help us with that.
Well, I had, and this is not an unusual experience, and my wife had a similar experience. I had 18 jobs in 27 years. Which translates to about a job every year and a half. And then the end of my career, I had a job about every year, which I can go through later. I took a non-conventional route to executive leadership or general management. I was in supply chain and manufacturing for 20 years. And that's typically not a way into the suite. It usually comes from commercial people, sales, marketing, and business development. You can get to a high level in manufacturing and supply chain, but you typically don't end up in the suite. And this sort of leads into a different discussion, which is the only lateral I ever took in 27 years was the one that totally changed my career and put it on a very accelerated trajectory. So I had been, like I said, in manufacturing for 20 years, and I felt I could do more. And I had a good relationship because I provided products and materials for a lot of the other added businesses. And so I knew all the presidents of those divisions. And I went around to all of them and I said, I want to do something different. I don't know what it is. There were about 7 people at the time, and all of them kind of patted me on the head and said, you're a really good manufacturing guy. You might want to wait for your boss to die or something, and you'll be that job someday. And I went to one guy, one division president, who didn't believe in any of that. And he said, he looked at me and he said, what's your passion? And I said, I love organizing things and getting things done. And he said, you can do that anywhere. And the next day I got an offer to transition into commercial operations as the head of marketing and sales services. So I went from 20 years in manufacturing to kind of a similar job. I was responsible for all of the stuff that it takes to keep the pharmaceutical sales force in the field. So that was cars and quotas and incentives, market research, advertising, anything you can think of that wasn't a direct part of the franchise. And it was a wonderful introduction for me. And then, 5 years later, I was an executive officer. I had a Colin Powell-like trajectory by being in the right place at the right time and by being able to organize things, I think. So I took a very different career to get to where I was. And I had to learn pretty quickly at the end of my career because I had never had exposure to general management or some of the things we had to do. So it was a bit of drinking from a fire hose for a while.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a great point, though. You said, hey, some of it was timing. You said it, right? So with timing, sometimes we have to be careful what we ask for. People will, hey, I want a new job. I want to get promoted. But then they get offered something and then hesitate on it. So talk about that a little bit. How important is it if you're ready, if you say you want this, to move into it?
If you want to take a lateral, is that what you mean, or just a different assignment?
Just a different assignment.
Well, a lot of this is going to come back to when we talk about mentorship. We're going to talk about advocacy, and we'll talk about networking. But I think one of the things that, particularly if you work in a big company, it's sometimes hard to figure out where you want to go because it's kind of a smorgasbord of opportunity. on one hand. On the other hand, you might have people telling you you're just an accountant, or you're just an R&D guy, or you're just a supply chain guy. And so you really have to get out, look around, look at the people you work with, see if there's something that interests you, and try to go from there. I think one of the things that's important is not to stay in the same channel the entire time. Now, if you're a finance person and you love finance, stay in that discipline as long as you want. But our company, and one of the great things about Abbott was, if you wanted to do something different, people would largely give you the opportunity. And that was a wonderful way to grow up. All companies aren't that way. But it starts with researching, looking around, looking at who you're working with and seeing if that's something that you want to do. And sometimes you do have to take that lateral job. We all want to be promoted everywhere along the way, but sometimes the lateral one, like with me, could make a big difference.
Yeah, and so talking about laterals, you hear all the time that sometimes you may have to take a lateral, and a lot of people are reluctant to take lateral, right? So from an executive level, how do you talk with someone about taking a lateral position, and then what things you think that could help them with moving forward?
Well, part of it depends upon what their needs are. Sometimes you have to take a lateral to get exposure to something that may be useful to you 2 or 3 moves down the way, particularly if you're identified as someone who has potential. So each of those conversations were different. It just depended upon the person and the opportunity and what they wanted to do. Sometimes, the business didn't necessarily want somebody to do something, but they wanted, like me, I wanted to go out and try something different. And you have to respond to that in some way. Either have to say no, or if you want to try that, you're not going to get promoted. You'll have to take a lateral, be there a couple of years, and there's no guarantee you can come back. You have to take that risk if that's what you're going to do.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Well, Joe, you took that leap and moved over to diagnostic side of our business, and you did that at a time where we were going through several different things. There were a lot of different events going on, and you were one of the leaders that led the organization through maybe not crisis, several different events, and one of those was the FDA Consent Decree. One of those was the Knoll acquisition. Another one was Hurricane Katrina.
Right.
So you had some. I'm surprised you're not like this right now.
No, but I'm gonna go into PTSD here in a minute if you keep saying all these things over and over again. I've forgotten about most of them, Cedrick. I'll talk to him about it for you, but some of those are a little difficult.
Yeah. So with those experiences, help us understand from your perspective, what was that experience like? We know you have to be calm and cool for the troops and the people, but what is that like for you in that moment?
Which one do you want to talk about? They were all life-altering.
Yeah, they definitely
were for you too.
Yeah, they were definitely major events. Well, so I'll start with the FDA Consent Decree. What was that like?
Well, just for your audience, if they weren't around, a consent decree, in kind of a simple way of looking at it, is a way for the government to force a regulated business to do something. In our case, we were regulated by many businesses, by many entities, including the FDA. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but Abbott Diagnostics did some things or didn't do some things, and the government thought we should, and so we entered into a consent decree. And it's a pretty serious business. It's about as serious as it gets. And so we had products removed from the market to get our attention. In the end, what they wanted was for us to do the things with compliance in our manufacturing operations, among other things, that they wanted to see done, that they had felt were lagging. And so we had products removed from the market. We couldn't introduce new products for a period of time. It was a very difficult period for a long period of time until we came out of it. Because our sales were affected, we lost market share. We were the world leader going into this. Our margin obviously fell. We had to lay off people. It was a pretty tough time. And there were really two things that we talk about with that. You just touched on both of them. One was it was a crisis for a period of time. And the other was cultural change was required. Change was required. Because part of the reason that we got into this problem was the culture at the time led it in that direction. And there were, I'm not going to get into the details, but there were really two things that had to get fixed. One was the FDA compliance. And the other was sort of the culture as it related to the customer. Because we had gotten away from the customer as being this great big diagnostic company. And we lost a lot of share, and we had a lot of very unhappy customers for a period of time. And so it required to be calm, but it really was equal parts crisis management and equal parts culture change.
Sure.
And the crisis part was in the beginning when we reissued the consent decree, and then when the business failed the first reinspection. And then as we got ready for the second one, which we did pass eventually. But the culture change was a big part. It was getting people to think differently about quality, differently about compliance, differently about the customer. And so it was equally weighted. And oftentimes crisis management and culture change can be the same thing, and can take the same skill sets. So
Sure.
That particular one, is one that I have blanked out in my head from 5 years of dealing with that. But in the end, we won. And it's fun for me to look back today and say Abbott Diagnostics is, I think, the biggest business at Abbott. It's probably the most profitable.
Yeah.
It's the one that's in the news today. It's in the Rose Garden with, instruments all the time. I'm so proud of how that business turned out. But
Absolutely.
it was a challenge for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the other events that you managed through was the Knoll acquisition.
Yeah.
Which was, it's always a happy days for Abbott when you're going through, or for any business when you're going through acquisition type thing. So walk us through that. What was it like from your level to manage through that part, or lead the company through that?
Well, I'll tell you that, but I'm going to link it to the first question you asked me. So I took the only lateral I ever had. I spent a year in marketing and sales services. It was wonderful. I learned how all you commercial people talk. So I had the ability how to speak the language. I was there a year, and I got a call from Miles White, our CEO, and he said, I want you to run Clara Abbott, which was the private foundation that helps Abbott employees and retirees. It needed some help. So I did that for a year. And then at the end of that year, he called and said, you saw in the papers, we just bought Knoll from BASF. It was $7 billion. It was Abbott's biggest acquisition, and I want you to run the integration. And it was an interesting challenge because these were two historic companies in the pharma space. Abbott going back to Dr. Abbott in 1885, Knoll going back to the Knoll brothers in Germany in about the same time period, and really responsible for sort of the modern way of looking at pharmaceutical R&D and manufacturing. Two great companies, a very German company and a very American company. And it was an interesting challenge culturally to put them together. That lasted about a year. It went great. It was a wonderful learning experience. The thing that I think was the most important that came out of that, we inherited about 10,000 terrific people from Knoll that have since integrated and become great Abbott citizens. The other was, early on, I was told, as we started this, there was an R&D project that I had to absolutely protect as part of the integration. And we had to literally, we called it ring fencing. We wouldn't let anybody, Knoll or Abbott, near them. And it was the code was D2E7. Well, D2E7 was Humira. It eventually became Humira. And the work we did to keep those scientists at work, it hadn't been filed yet, enabled us to file that NDA about 6 months earlier. And when you look back now, some 15 years later, it's the biggest selling pharma product in history. And the Knoll deal did a number of things. It made Abbott a truly global company. I was, right after we did this, I was at an Abbott board meeting in Germany, and one of our board members was a very experienced international guy. He said, you've been an international company, meaning you sell products and you do things in different companies. Knoll's going to make you a global company because you're going to learn how to participate in those markets as they did. And he was right, and it exactly happened. It also enabled the spinoff of the hospital products business, which is Hospira, which is now part of Pfizer. It enabled the spinoff of AbbVie, which is, of course, is its own entity today.
Right.
And it was an amazing deal. It was a tremendous return on the investment. It fundamentally changed the company. It brought some remarkable people into the organization and created all this value for shareholders and employees. But it was an interesting assignment from the beginning. But that was all about speed. Because if you look at the debt service on $7 billion, we borrowed part of that. The debt service on what we borrowed, you wouldn't believe. So we were moving with a lot of speed to try to get the synergies up and get the sales in and get the things going we had to do. But had great cooperation from them, and it was a wonderful experience.
Wow. Well, you see, folks, the reason why I know that for you're a non-Abbott person, you may not have any interest in this, but here's why this is important. It's important for you to understand when you are running a business, whether it's a smaller business or it's a global healthcare organization. that sometimes you have to pivot. Your goals may say you're going one way, but things happen in the industry and you might have to pivot your business, right? And then as a leader, you may have to bring in other people that can help you with that transition. That's why this is important. From a career perspective, it's helping you understand that not everything that you plan is going to happen the way that you plan it, and you have to be flexible in your career. Now, one of the other things, Joe, that you helped the organization get through and the United States get through, at least the southern part of the United States, was Hurricane Katrina, right? That was one of the, from an Abbott perspective, one of the proudest moments in a career, right? And you were our leader during that time period. What was that like for you?
Well, first off, it was satisfying when I listened to your interview with Ron Burke last month that you said that was your proudest moment, because that was actually my proudest moment of my career. It was an interesting experience. It was such an epical moment in our country's history. It was one of the worst natural disasters you can think of in terms of how it all came down. And we had to respond relatively quickly. And if people recall, when the hurricane made landfall, it turned disastrous overnight, particularly in New Orleans and in certain cities along the Gulf Coast. And people had to be removed. They had to be evacuated because the neighborhoods were gone. And it was just a total mess. And so Houston, where you were, ended up being the primary site where people were being brought from New Orleans all the way across the Gulf Coast into Houston. And I do remember, as you do, the conference call when we called you up. I think you were with Tim Screen maybe. And we just come from a meeting with Miles, and he said, you got to do whatever you got to do. And for the audience at the time, we were still trying to build the diagnostic franchise. And we had 3 large semi-tractor trailers called Architours. Architect was the name of our instrument. And inside the big trailers in the back were working Architect instruments that we could take to hospitals and show people what they looked like. It was kind of a cool idea. Yeah. But they kind of became like our aircraft carriers for Abbott, and we could deploy power into certain regions. And so we took those 3 Architours and we filled them not only with our product and diagnostics, but nutrition products and all kinds of other stuff, and deployed them to different places. And one of them, I know 2 of them at least started and 1 stayed there, came to you in Houston. Yes. And for your audience, we identify Cedrick as the man on the ground and Tim Screen to get this done. And what had happened was Harris County in Texas and Houston had set up this remarkable evacuation station at the Reliant Complex in Houston, which is the Astrodome, Reliant Field, and the basketball center. And we flew down to check it out and see how it was going to go. After the call, you don't know this part, after the call with Cedrick and Tim, I had to go back and tell Miles, and he said, well, do you know this guy Cedrick? And I said, yeah. And he goes, can you pull this off? And I said, yeah. Going like this, I hope he does. So we flew down there. I remember you picked us up, and I saw the most remarkable thing I've ever seen in my life, which was what Harris County had provided for 20,000 people to live in the Astrodome, live in the football field, and then to come into the underground parking lot in the basketball arena into a 100 and some bed field hospital that had been set up to triage people. And I remember you met us, you took us around, you knew all the players from your 20 years of relationship building in Harris County. We met all the folks that were running the field hospital. It was amazing. And they were so grateful to have it because we were there first. I mean, we had this big truck full of stuff. And one of the things that happened was, I remember you took me upstairs and we went out and we looked across the parking lot, and there were just legions of buses, school buses and tour coaches coming in from the Gulf Coast. And they would patiently wait in line, come to the front of the basketball center. People would get off. These are folks who lost their homes. They've been in water 12 hours before. You don't want to be in water in a hurricane. It's a terrible thing. And so they all had to be tested. They didn't have medicine. They didn't have anything, even the clothes on their back. And they were brought in. One of the things they did was the CBC. They did a red and white blood cell count as a baseline to see what people were doing. And we provided the testing for that in the back of our big trucks, thanks to you. But it was a great moment. It was a great moment for Abbott. I think it was a great moment for watching how one group of people can care for another. The Harris County people never got enough credit for that. But it was a great experience. It was fun working with you on that. And of course, you came through big time, and it was amazing. It was just really an amazing experience. One of the things that we had done in the year prior to that, we started something called the Executive Crisis Management Team. And I led that team, and it was one of my many ancillary duties in addition to running the business. And we prepared. We brought in people that trained us for all kinds of things, including natural disasters. And so it was really our first experience. And that UCMT is still in play. I mean, I know for a fact it's activated today dealing with the pandemic. So, but you were a key player in the front part of that, Cedrick, and you're too humble to talk about it, but people should know the work you did. It was great.
Well, thank you. I was definitely pleased that Avid put that trust in Tim and myself to make this happen. Like I said before, it was one of the proudest moments in my life for you guys to say, whatever they need, it doesn't matter if it's Avid or not. You just let us know what they need, and we'll make it happen.
Right.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah, absolutely. That is wonderful. So leaders come in all different shapes and packages and strengths and things that they need to work on. What strengths do you feel are important for a successful leader?
Well, there's a difference between strengths and characteristics, and then we could talk about this all day. I think one of them is to be authentic. I think people have to know you're real, that you're approachable, that you are what you say you are. So to be, I think, authentic and genuine is very important. I think you have to be technically competent to a point. You have to understand the language, be able to know and explain it and understand what people are telling you. In order to direct it, you have to be technically competent. I mean, that was certainly the case in the military. You can't imagine military where people aren't competent. You can't be that in business either. I think, particularly the higher you go, one of the things I learned is you have to be either a very good or a great communicator. You can't be a good communicator. And I think that's particularly true today. Business is in front of, my kids have access to their work 24 hours a day. And we do this in the board, and the company with the board I sit on. With technology today, there's no going home at 5 o'clock. Your work is with you. It's in the palm of your hand. And there's so much information coming to employees. And unless as the leader, you know how to be a good communicator, you're just going to compete with all that noise. And so being a very, very good or a great communicator, if you don't know how to be one, learn how to be one. There's lots of help to help you be able to do that. I think one of the things that people don't want to do, but you have to do, is you have to make tough decisions. You have to be fair, but you have to make the decision. You don't default to a committee. You don't blame your boss. You don't take it to your subordinates. You have to make the call. And people will know, if you're waffling on that. So you have to be able to make tough decisions, but you have to be fair. And I think the one thing I've learned ever since I was in the Army, and this one also we could talk about forever, is you have to pay attention to detail. That comes up over and over again. And you don't have to get in people's desk drawers all the time, but you do have to understand the business and you have to understand detail. That's just a few things.
Well, that's a great list, and I'm going to be using this list tomorrow when I'm talking to a group of entrepreneurs. Talk about what characteristics that great leaders need to have. One, be authentic. Two, be technically competent. Be a great communicator. Be able to make tough decisions. Be fair, and be able to pay attention to the details. That's great advice. Absolutely. Love that. So I'll be using that tomorrow. I'll be giving you credit for it, but I'll be using it.
That's okay. You can have it for free. It's in the air.
From a diversity and inclusion standpoint, Joe, you were one of the best that I've seen at the executive level in this area. And so why is it that diversity and inclusion so important to you?
Well, a couple things. I think there needs to be some context around diversity and inclusion, which sometimes can be two different things, oftentimes is.
Sure.
I think the first is to recognize, we live in a very diverse country. We have been diverse for a very long period of time. The problem is we don't embrace diversity all the time. We do here, we don't do there. We do it for some time, then we don't do it. And other companies do it, but somebody else doesn't do it. And I think it's a problem, and it needs to be a way of life. It shouldn't be just something that we do. So I think to recognize we're diverse and we all have to live in the same place, we all have to work in the same place, we all have to get along. We have to recognize it's there. I think it's the right thing to do, which is always, the best way to start any conversation. It's very good for business. You know, one of the things, as I was thinking about this, I want to make sure up front that the people who are listening don't think that I think diversity is only good because it's a good productivity tool, which it is. But we're talking about business. But I think there's three things around it for me. One is it's the right thing to do. One is that it's good for business as we're talking about it. And another is it's good for the people that are involved, because everybody wants to feel like they have a seat at the table. In terms of business, I mean, I was thinking about as far back as 15 years ago, I was at all employee meetings because we had these all the time, if you remember, trying to change the culture. And I said, back then, the more diverse we are, the stronger we are. And there's reasons for that. And that is that when we bring people from different places, different backgrounds, different genders, different whatever, everybody's got a different way they were brought up. And everybody has a different way of solving a problem. Everybody has a different way of thinking about growth, different things about for the company. You know, in the course of my career, and particularly Abbott Diagnostics a little bit after, I inherited some businesses that were in distress. And you remember a couple of them.
Yeah.
And I always knew I was in trouble when I went to those businesses the first time. I went to a conference room, sat around the table, and everybody looked like me. Because I knew that the tapestry of ideas and creativity was not going to be there. And, you know, history is replete with examples of people who surround themselves with people who look like themselves and think like themselves, and it's always a recipe for disaster.
Right.
And so, you know, if you take you and I, for example, we were raised in different places, not too far apart in time, but in different places. There's a great deal of commonality between you and me in terms of how we were raised, in terms of family, because I've heard you talk religion, service, and so forth. But there's also differences. We come from a different location, different heritage, different culture. But we each bring something different to the table that's important for a leader, for a business person. No, we each solve problems differently. We do go after things differently. And it's that richness that we have to have. And that's why diversity, I think, is very good. And so I used to preach that all the time. And there's lots of ways you can practice that. You can put people in who are qualified in positions that somebody didn't let them in before. We started affinity groups, if you remember, Diagnostic Women in Action, Black Leadership Council, Part-Time Network. I was so thrilled to hear Ron Burke talk about there's now a Veterans Network.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for business. And I think, you know, the faster people embrace that, the better off they're going to be. And that's, like I said, 15 years ago, and here we are talking about it. And I think finally, the third point I had was for people themselves. And I think the higher you go in the organization, if you care about the organization and where it's going, you don't want anybody that works for you to feel like they don't have a seat at the table, like their voice doesn't count, like they don't matter. That's a terrible thing. None of us want to feel that way. Mm-hmm. And if we do think that's the case, then we got to do something about it. And for that reason too, I think it's critically important. So for me, it was always important. I mean, it was important for all those reasons, but I don't need studies to tell me that diversity works in the workplace. It does. You're better for it. I saw it with my own eyes. We just need more people to embrace it.
Right. Well, we get to the point where we need study. So one of the things, you know, and there were many things that I remember, but one of the things that sticks with me, it was like you told me yesterday. I said, Joe, you know, corporate HR called me and asked me, how can I find so many diverse candidates? And they couldn't find diverse candidates. And you kind of laughed, like you said, like you just did there. And you said, look, Cedrick, keep doing what you're doing. Bring those candidates forward to us, and we'll make sure that they meet all the things that we need and they are a good fit for the organization. We'll make sure that we remove any barriers. But you said this, you said, we are a large global organization. We can find and not find anybody we want to.
Yep.
And that statement stuck with me all these years. It was just a dynamic statement.
I don't want to talk about corporate HR. I'm happy to talk about the HR that worked for me, but I don't want to, with Peggy Taylor, I don't want to talk about corporate HR. But it brings up another subject, which is, and this is an unfortunate thing I saw happening then and I see it happen now, which is where leadership defaults to process. Okay. So instead of going to you or to people who are on the ground in the field and saying, you know, we need candidates for this job or another, we try to do it through a process and at a high level, and it doesn't work. It's the same thing with mentoring. You know, mentoring's become a lost art. A lot of companies think they want to do mentoring, but instead of encouraging leaders to be mentors, they create a process. I got in a lot of trouble one time as an executive officer at a senior staff meeting when it was suggested that we were going to go to what I call like a dating game for mentors, where instead of it happening naturally, where mentees find mentors or vice versa, the company was going to match them up. And I said, this is never going to work. It's like a 1 in 10 chance. And of course, I got in a lot of trouble for that. But it didn't work. Of course, it didn't work. It wasn't going to work. But that's the default of leadership, to process. And whether it's trying to hire people through a process rather than relying on people who know better, or it's trying to force fit mentors with mentees to say that you did it, it's a problem. And I've seen more and more of that happen. I think it's one of the reasons why we don't have as many mentors today.
Sure. Yeah. So, there are a lot of young people, millennials, and coming up now, the iGeners or Generation Z, and they're trying to land these jobs in major healthcare companies or sales roles. What's one or two things you could give them as a word of advice when they are trying to get into large global companies?
Well, I think there's two things. One is if they're trying to get in, and the second one is if they're in and they're trying to go do something else. Trying to get in is a whole different subject. And I think, as you know, and I've seen this with my kids, trying to apply for work anywhere has become an interesting science of how you do
Sure.
it. I think, however, once people are inside and they want to try something, you take salespeople for an example, and you want to try something different, and you're in a sales organization and all you see is your district or your territory. Start asking questions of people. And one great place to ask, particularly if you're in field sales, for example, and you're away from the parent company or you're away from headquarters. I ran marketing and sales services. We did all this stuff to support people in the field. I always really loved it when reps or DMs would call us and ask us stuff, because nobody ever asked us anything. And it's a great way for a young salesperson to understand how the company works, because they're dealing with people at headquarters. If you're dealing with someone in a function like that, talk to them, ask them how these things work, ask them what their jobs are like. Because as you know, inevitably in sales, you're going to come back in house at some point, and you're going to come into training, you're going to come into marketing, you're going to come into national accounts, you're going to come into something, and you don't want to come in cold. And yet all these people are there, and you're working with them. So take the opportunity to talk to them.
Yeah. So really what you're saying is networking is important.
It's very important. It's important in, whatever we do.
Sure. Yeah. And so, sometimes networking is hard. So I know that there's not a best way to network, right? But what would be some words of advice you would give someone when they're networking, either questions they should ask or something they should be thinking about, talking about in that networking environment?
Well, a lot of companies, we can use Abbott as an example, have formal networking organizations that promote and help people do this. You can join an affinity group, for example. You're going to meet all kinds of people, typically at levels higher than yourself, who could be very influential to you, even in your particular discipline or functional area. There's just so many ways I think you can approach it. One of the things I was taught early in my career is that volunteering is not a dirty word. That if you volunteer for certain things, you work on the annual fund, you raise money for United Way, you are the turkey carver at Thanksgiving. There's a million ways that you can do things within the company to volunteer for stuff that gets you in front of people that you ordinarily, probably wouldn't be able to do. So, networking can take a lot of routes. I think what's different in networking today versus when I started, there wasn't any. I mean, you had to make your own. And today there's more formal practice, more ways to do that. But, it falls back on the individual, and it brings up something else I want to talk to you about, which is this notion of self-advocacy. One of the biggest disappointments I've had since I retired from Abbott 13 years ago, and then I've been working in private equity, is that there is no more mentoring. I mean, people just don't do it. And it's not a leadership expectation on the behalf of boards to leaders. It's not on leaders to managers. And people just simply don't do it. They do their job, but they don't necessarily mentor. And what's ended up happening is you get employees who feel that, it's every person for themselves. And I spend a lot more time now teaching people how to be self-advocates than worrying about mentoring, because there may not be anybody there to mentor them. And so networking goes hand in hand with advocacy. I mean, we've always had a certain amount of self-advocacy we have to do, right? You have to get out, you have to meet people, you have to do things. I think where we're at today in a lot of places is if you want to get ahead, you might have to think 100% of the time you're going to be an advocate for yourself. And that's a tough thing to think about, which is if you're lucky enough to have a mentor, or if you're in an environment that has them, get one, because it's tough. And, my 4 sons all work. They've been out working for a while. 3 are in healthcare. One's in a public accounting firm. And I hear this from them all the time. They have me, but they don't have anybody there. And I've had to teach them how to advocate, how to go in and push their agenda and do the things they want to do. And I do that with a lot of people at lots of different levels, including up to the officer level. So networking, I think, does go hand in hand with this notion of self-advocacy.
Yeah.
But it's all around the idea that when you join a company, there's not going to be a basket of people there probably to help you. There's a lot of services. There are a lot of things you can take advantage of, but it's going to be up to you to go do it.
Yeah.
So one of the fun things I used to have, I used to look at this every once in a while. Abbott had and it's not an exception, within companies. We had so many things for employees. Most people didn't even know what was there.
Right.
I didn't know what was there. And so if I didn't know what was there, chances are you're not going to know what was there.
Right.
So you got to get out. You have to exercise some independence, some responsibility. You have to advocate for yourself. So there are tools, there are things there. You just got to go find them.
Yeah. So let me make sure that I'm clear on this. When you say self-advocate, there's a line there where you start worrying about, well, how do I go and talk about myself to maybe not even an executive level person, but someone that's higher up in your organization to me? How do you start that conversation or approach that conversation?
Well, it's that, and it's a whole lot more. It's, I want a promotion. How am I going to make that happen? I think I should get paid because I'm doing 2 jobs. I need to go. I want an international assignment. I mean, there's a million variables you can think of that are all typically career related, and it's a function of giving people a lot of times I come across people, particularly higher in the organization. They've been around for a while. They just need me to kind of give them a push and tell them it's okay. You almost have to give people permission to do it. But I think at all levels, it requires you just kind of have to understand the objective and that you're going to do it yourself. And you can't be timid. And one of the things I've told my kids, and I just had this conversation with one of them this morning, you don't self-limit something. If you want to go ask for something, ask for everything. Don't think for somebody else. Don't limit yourself before it ever happens. Go in and ask for whatever it is. The worst they can do is say no. But don't you be the one that says no on any or all part of it.
Yeah,
and that's true for anybody on all kinds of things.
Yes, you hit on exactly what I was trying to get at. Is some people get afraid to ask for the world.
Yes.
You may not get the world, but if you don't ask for it, you're definitely not going
to get it.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to go and ask for what it is you want. That's the key. So, growth has to be intentional. And obviously you've done a lot of things to grow yourself and to grow the organization. But why is professional growth and development something that's important to a person's career?
If I look back at myself, the people that were my peers that I started out with that stayed at the company, who went up in the company, the people that I worked with later who were my bosses or other people, executive officers, all of them took their professional development seriously. Nobody thought that they were in a job by accident. No one thought they were there because they were smarter and better looking than anybody else. They did it as part of an intentional plan. So they had a career plan. They had a way of augmenting. They got an MBA. They got an additional degree. They did some other augmentation of training. They did something. They wrote. I mean, I had colleagues who write about certain things. They present. There's lots of different ways you can do self-development or professional development. But the successful people that I saw, none of them just did anything more than just keep their nose down and work hard. They did other things to expand themselves, make themselves more valuable. They took lateral assignments. They took assignments in areas that were very uncomfortable to them. They might have been in finance and they went to work in HR. They might have been in HR and they went to work in marketing. The notion of development is critically important. But all I can say is the people I saw, and there were lots of them that were successful, all practice all are parts of what I just told you.
So they did things outside their comfort zone.
Yeah. Or I mean, they were active all the time and professionally developing themselves in lots of different ways.
Awesome. So to my audience tonight, I want you to make sure that you get this point, and I'm going to be talking about this point again later this week, but it's not about just getting a job and then just sitting there and say, I've arrived. Now it's about taking that job very seriously and still growing and developing yourself. And one of the things Joe said earlier about the self-advocacy, see, when you go to be a self-advocate, one of the things that people are going to ask you, so what things are you doing? Right? And you have to be ready and prepared to talk about that.
Yep.
So if someone came to you, Joe, to be a mentor, what are you looking for in order to say, yes, I'm going to mentor that person?
Well, that's an easy one because I've spent a lot of time practicing this over the years. There's two things. One is that they listen, and two is that they generally do as I tell them to do. I don't mean that to sound terribly didactic, but what I mean is if I tell you to do something, I don't want you to think about it, and then, if you feel like doing it, you'll do it. People do have to listen, and they have to take action. Otherwise, it's a waste of my time if you take my advice and then don't do anything. And after a while, it's kind of easy to find the people who just want to come in and talk to you about stuff and the ones who are really serious about doing something. And so if a person is willing to, the other way I'll say it is, if a person is willing to listen and invest their time in equal amounts or more, I'm perfectly happy to help. And you can tell that generally pretty quickly. And it's usually a very satisfying relationship when that's the case, because it's fun to watch people grow. It's fun to watch them take advice. One of the things that's a great learning skill is to take advice from people. There's a lot of young people in particular I met growing up who had MBAs from Stanford and other places. They thought they knew everything. They don't. Nobody does. But learning how to take advice from somebody is a critical skill. And then acting upon that advice, whether it works or not. Most of the time I told people something that did work, but if it didn't, then you try again. But I wanted to always make sure that someone was listening, they were serious about it, and that they were earnest in terms of doing something. Otherwise, it's not worth anybody's time. And there's plenty of people who are serious about mentoring that need your time. Sure. So I have a very short fuse when it comes to that. I don't want to waste time with somebody who just wants to talk to me about something.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll say, like Judge Judy says, I'm not Dr. Phil. If you want someone to talk to, go to Dr. Phil.
That's right. I'm not Dr. You don't want me to be Dr. Phil.
So have you ever had to make that tough choice and say, I can't mentor you anymore?
I don't know if I had anybody who I was mentoring who I said, I'm not going to do it anymore. I had people I said, you need to try something different. I'm not going to do this. So I never had anybody that I unmentored.
Okay.
I stuck with them.
You stuck with them, and all right, that's awesome. So from we talk about mentorship, we talk about diversity and inclusion, but one of the things that around diversity and inclusion, it ties into community service. And what I found out in the course of going through this process with you to have you on the show is you do a lot of community service. Let's talk about some of that, the community service that you're doing, because it's definitely noteworthy and it's important for people to understand civic involvement, community service is a way of life.
Well, I'll talk about that in a second, but it kind of brings up how I got there in the first place. And it comes back to leadership, and we had a discussion earlier about management. We could talk about leadership versus management for 5 hours and never get close. But the way I've always thought about it, just for me, and what I tried to teach younger people, if you have a job, you're a manager, you're a supervisor of people, you have responsibility. You go to work every day, you deliver results, you're accountable, you meet your goals, and you're looked at as a very good manager. That's wonderful. If you do that for 30 years, God bless you, because that's what you're expected to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think a further definition of that for leadership is you have a responsibility to do good with the platform that you have. So if you're a manager, if you're a leader, if you're a supervisor, you have a platform. You have a louder voice than most people, and most people have to listen to you. You have resources. You have an ability to get stuff done. You have influence. And you can use that for good. And that, I think, is the difference between a manager and a leader. Is a leader gets all the technical things done, but also steps outside themselves to do other things. And so you have a platform. You've been given a platform, and that platform comes with an ability to do things. And there's lots of ways you can do that. The routes I chose were, and I did this my entire working career, was to focus on representing the company in community service. It has lots of advantages. It's wonderful team building. It's great for the people you're going out to help in the community. It's wonderful for the company. Of course, we work for a company that encouraged us to do that. It's great leadership training for young managers to organize the day and go help United Way or go help a homeless shelter or whatever you want to go do. And so service is, I think, a very critical part of that difference of being a leader. In my case, after I retired, I decided that education was the thing that I thought could make the biggest difference. You know, if you think about all the issues in the world, there's only so much any of us can do. But what we can do is help education. We can help education, particularly for kids who otherwise would have a more difficult time than my kids did, for example, or your kids did. And so it's the best way to success. It's the best way out if you're in a difficult place. And that's where I focus my philanthropy and where I focus my time. And so the three things that I've been involved with in the last 13 years, one, we started Christ the King in Chicago. It's what's called a Cristo Rey School. It's part of a network of, I think, over 30 schools now. It's mostly Jesuit run, but they go into the most challenged neighborhoods in America and in the cities. Ones where there's, you know, poor public schools and there's violence and crime and poverty rates. And they build these great Jesuit schools. And the way the program works, they have something called corporate work study, where 4 kids share a job and a company pays the high school for those kids to work 5 days a week or 5 days a month. So they pay for about, 60-70% of their tuition, and then we fundraise the rest. But they get a great education. They get to work in great places like Banks Hospitals in Chicago. They work in the Board of Trade. They work at Mayor Lightfoot's office. They work for the Blackhawks. They get built-in mentors. It's a marvelous place. And as you mentioned at the outset, it's on the west side. It's in the Austin neighborhood, which is one of Chicago's biggest neighborhoods, but it's also, right now, probably the most violent, dangerous place to live. There is no public high school. It closed a number of years ago. So it was a logical location for Cristo Rey to come to. And we were involved from the beginning. I was there on the first day when the first 38 kids in the freshman class came into an old rented Catholic grade school. And then we built a remarkable building a couple of years later, and we now have about 400 kids at the school. And so it's a wonderful place in the midst of a place that's pretty difficult. And it's a lot of fun. It's attracted a lot of attention throughout Chicago, but it's very dear to my heart. The other thing I did was no good deed goes unturned. So I'd been down here a couple of years, and the bishop here in Phoenix, the Catholic diocese, found out I'd helped build a high school, and he said, "You should help me here." So I ran a feasibility study for a year that looked at a Catholic high school out in the West Valley of Arizona, which is the last undeveloped and fast-growing part of the valley. And there was no high school out there for no parochial high school. And so we built one in a neighborhood that's largely Hispanic, kind of lower middle income, a place where parents generally can't afford to send their kids to a school, but we figured out how to do it. And so St. John Paul II opened several years ago. Our first graduating class is next year, so I can't wait. But it's a wonderful place out in the West Valley that, and prior to that, parents had to drive 35 miles into Phoenix if their kids wanted to go to a Catholic school. Wow. And then the last thing I do is I help these young Franciscan missionaries who came here from Pennsylvania 5 years ago. And they work on the reservation south of Phoenix, and they tend to the native people. It's a huge reservation. They're responsible for 12 mission parishes. And many of the issues that you see on the reservation are the same as you see on the west side of Chicago. Drugs and gangs and violence and alcohol. And it's a tough scene. So so that we have a grade school there that's an entirely native school. And we spent a lot of time helping with them too. So I've just chosen education as the thing I want to do. But I think the larger question here is, or the larger thing that I like to see is people using their work experience to help in the community.
Yeah. And what made you decide, I mean, beside the obvious, but what other reasons made you decide to say education is, for me, that's where my passion is going to be, and that's where my philanthropy is going to be?
I think it's the fastest way to make a result. in a child's life. I think or in a community's life. I mean, I look at the impact that Christ the King has played on the West Side with 400 kids in there. It's pretty substantial. 100% of our kids are accepted into college every year. It makes a huge difference. And so I think it's the fastest way to help young people in need. And it's probably the most satisfying. So for us, that was the easy thing to do.
Wow. Well, that's a great value prop just on that right there, just the merits of that. That's awesome. Congratulations on that, and keep doing that wonderful work. You know, Joe, you've had a wonderful and long career, healthy in terms of success, all the different measures of success career. But we've all had things that we've failed at or didn't do as well as we wanted to. What's one of those things that you said, man, it just didn't work out the way I wanted it to work out, and what you learn from it?
I had one example. I was in my first job. I was a young inventory controller in the hospital products division, and the inventories I controlled were for IV solutions. And we had this one product we didn't make very often, and I just didn't pay attention to the rubber stopper that went in the top. And I let us run out. It shut down production for 2 days, and we back ordered the product. It wasn't a huge deal. It was more embarrassing than it was anything else. But I learned a lot. I talked before about attention to detail. But I hadn't understood, what would happen if I didn't do that right. I didn't realize 20 people had nothing to do for 2 days. I didn't realize our customers wouldn't have product for 3 weeks. So it was a great learning experience. I was fortunate to work for a boss who understood. After he got done kicking me, he explained this to me about how I should not do this again. But, the rest of my career, I didn't really have anything where I could say I cost the company millions of dollars, What I did have were, and I was pretty good at hiring people, but I had a few that didn't work out that I would tell you were failures on my part for not seeing it through enough, not vetting enough. And that can also cost the company money if you get somebody in there at a senior level. I didn't have a lot of them, but I had a couple. And you have to learn from those. You have to understand, how did somebody slip through that net? When typically you have a pretty good track record of doing it. So I didn't have a lot of process failures. I had some people failures. But you have to learn from them. I mean, sure. Hide from them. But, we were fortunate to work for a company where, by and large, if we made mistakes, we were allowed to, and we were told that, no, you can't do it more than once, but
yeah, right.
We were taught what not to do again. If that was
right. Yeah. If you do that multiple times, you're probably a different conversation, right?
Right. A very different conversation.
So, this is a little bit off topic, but you may not even remember this. I just remember it. We were so we were at a national sales meeting, and I don't remember where we were, but we were at a national sales meeting, and your first wife was there, and I didn't know who she was. And everybody was just laughing and talking. And then we started talking about our lifestyles and where we were from and all this type of stuff. And she and I got into this long conversation. Now, again, I didn't know who she was. And we kind of disagreed on certain things. It was still a good conversation, but all the other Abbott people knew who she was. And you were way on the other side, not even paying attention. And I never forget Kyle McGibbon was like, Cedrick, quiet, be quiet. And, I was just going on and going, we were just going back and forth. And afterwards, Kyle said, Cedrick, do you know whose wife that was? I said, no, who is that? He goes, that's Joe Nemmers. I was like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me?
She never told me anything.
It was just interesting. Well, if you could have seen them reacting.
Oh, I'm sure they're having a great time. But I used to bring, you're talking about my late wife, Kathy. I used to bring her along to stuff, and she was very involved in the things I did in my career. But she would never tell me if she had conversations with you guys. And I never told her what I was. She'd always tell people, I don't know what he's doing until I read it in the newspaper. Because when you're head of a public company, she just went like this all the time until it happened. But no, she never told me that she had that conversation with you.
Yeah, it was funny. So this question is maybe a little difficult, but if you had to pick two things that someone should do in their career in order to move to an executive level position, what would that be?
Pray and be careful what you wish for. I think everybody rises to a level, or to an executive level, a different way, like I described before. Mine was being in the right place at the right time and having a certain skill set that was needed by the company. It just kind of depends, I think. I think the common things that you want, that are successful for you in your first job, will be successful for you in your last job. If you work hard, if you're honest, if you're good with people, if you perform, you achieve, you produce results, you do all the things you're supposed to do. Whatever you learn how to do in that first job, if you're still doing them by the last job, you might be an executive. So I don't think there's any secret sauce to it other than to pay attention and take opportunities as they come. Going back to laterals, there's sort of a corollary to laterals, which is, we talked about briefly, which is doing things or doing something that's not what you were trained to do, or that you thought you were going to do, or that might have been way out of your comfort zone, or that other people told you, don't go to work in quality, don't go to work in manufacturing. What's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. That can be some of the dumbest advice you could get. And you have to follow your heart. One of the things I've learned over time is that most people, the vast majority of the time, their instinct is correct. And don't let somebody else talk you out of your instinct, because it's almost always right. So I would say, if you're going to try to be an executive someday, like I said, be careful what you want to do. But just work hard, do all the things in the first job. You'll be doing the same things in your last job.
Awesome. Well, that's good advice. So here's what I took from that, folks. He said, work hard. So that means, and work hard doesn't just mean beat yourself. He's also talking about working smart, being honest, and then producing results. Results take care of a whole lot of things. So just remember that.
There's a corollary to this, Cedrick, if I can.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Close with that. When I was in the Army Reserve, I worked for a general officer. He was a great guy. He was a very faithful man. And to this day, he still talks about this. But he said there are three things you have to do in your career at all times. You have to be physically fit, you have to be mentally fit, and you have to be spiritually fit. Now, he didn't mean you have to run Ironman or anything. He didn't mean, but what he said was, you have to be ready for things, So the higher you go in the organization, you have more stress. You better be physically and mentally fit. You better be spiritually fit, however you choose to do that. And he said you have to do all three. You can't do two and miss one. You can't do one and miss two. You have to do all three. So you have to be physically fit to the task. You have to be mentally fit for it. And in your mind, however you do that, you have to be spiritually balanced. Because the higher you go, the tougher it gets. And there's, sometimes those are the only things you have to rely upon. And he was right, and everybody's different how you approach that. But I think it was good advice. I've never forgotten it. He still preaches it, but it's good stuff.
Well, that's awesome. I like that. Mentally fit, physically fit, and spiritually fit, folks. Wow, I have so many good lessons for later this week. So I'm going to ask you one last question here. So, you're retired, or you're semi-retired, but what's next for you?
Well, when I retired from Abbott, for the first 6 months, people would call me and say, "How are you?" Like I was dying or something. And I say, "Hey, I retired from Abbott. I didn't retire from life. I mean, I'm still here." So, I stay really busy. Just like you, you're an Abbott retiree. Look at you. Almost every Abbott retiree I know, including my wife, we have more things to do than we have time. So we have lots of stuff. Like you said, we have 9 kids. We got all kinds of things going on. Kathy's going back to school too. She went back to school and got her nursing degree after she retired with 30 years at Abbott, and she's going back looking at a master's degree to help combine spiritual healing with physical healing. So
hold on, stop right there before you go for a start, folks. I want you to. He slid right by that. I want you to understand this. His wife spent years with. How many years was she with Abbott?
30.
30-year career. She's retired and she's still growing. She went back to school and got another degree, a nursing degree, and now she's going to go get another degree. See, folks, we always tell you have to be intentional about growth. That's intentionality right there. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I can't top you, Cedrick. I never could. I'm not going to try now.
Well, hey, Joe, I want to tell you from the top of my heart, from the bottom of my heart, I totally appreciate you spending time with Talk Leadership, Cedrick, and joining me today. This was just awesome experience for me. Hopefully it was good for you as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So, guys, thank you for tuning in tonight. There's a lot of avid people that were in there. Ron Burke said, "Hold until relieved." You know, that was your famous line.
Right.
He said, "Ron, you're relieved."
He's relieved. So are you.
We have Glenda Cheatham on. Mark Smith's dropped in. Stuart Everstein dropped in. Sheila Waters dropped in. A young lady who you don't know yet, but I'm going to introduce you to her. She's a sales rep. I hired her into Avid. She lives in Phoenix. Her name is Bettina Ortiz. And Ken, your good friend Ken Thornton dropped in. Obviously, Ron Burke, Marlene Walters dropped in, and some that didn't comment. So a lot of avid people here tonight to say hello to you. So again, thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. Hey guys, tomorrow night, tune in at 5:30 Central Time. We will have Miss Inga Scott Collins on the show. You don't want to miss Miss Inga, boy. She is an awesome young lady doing some wonderful things. You say millennials are not doing anything. She's a millennial that's making moves. Then tomorrow night at 6:30, we will be on the Empowered Living Network with the Black Entrepreneurs Institute. Then don't finish there. Come right back here to Facebook at 7:30. My daughter will be on Talk with TK with her Mindset 180 Academy. And then Monday night, folks, for all you Louisiana people and everybody that wants to hear from a school district superintendent, Mr. Carl Brookhouse will be our guest next Monday night. So tune in. And Thursday this week, we'll finish up at 4 p.m. Central on the IBGR.network. With my weekly radio show. Remember, folks, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Don't be on the menu. Thank you for tuning in tonight. See you next week.